He's from the Draft Network. He is Joe Marino, who joins us on Big Blue Kickoff Live, one of our yearly guests to talk some NFL Draft. Joe, you got Schmeelk, Medow, and Dottino here. Hope you and yours are well. Thanks for the time today, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Joe, let's start here. We heard about a couple days ago the Caleb Farley back surgery. He's not participating in the Virginia Tech Pro Day today. We've seen Surtain and J.C. Horn both basically perform virtually off the charts in their two Pro Day performances. How do you now see the top of this cornerback group in the draft playing out? How close is Horn to Surtain? How far back is Farley going to drop now? Just give me the lowdown on how you think the top of this cornerback class now is starting to shape up a month before the draft.
Well, I think you've identified the three best corners in the draft, and before the most recent back surgery came out about Caleb Farley, I would have sat here and told you that he was clearly the best corner in the class, the best blend of size, athleticism, traits, ball production. You see everything from Farley, but you start to have to ask yourself some hard questions with his second back surgery since 2019. He also had an ACL tear in the last few years as well, and that's concerning because if you're going to pick a player in the first round, you want to get return on that investment. If they're not available, they can't help you, and I do think that pushes him down. And so I do think that Patrick Surtain from Alabama is the best corner in this class now with this information about Farley. Surtain is just so technically refined. I mean, he looks like a pro already when you watch him play. He's proven in press coverage, and you love those guys that can be disruptive at the line of scrimmage and throw off route timing. So he gives you physicality, press coverage ability, and he's very, very savvy when it comes to route anticipation and staying connected with receivers. J.C. Horn had an unbelievable pro day, and you see those man coverage traits show up on tape that you need, where you need that athleticism to play the style of football that J.C. Horn plays. My challenge with Horn is there's no question he's a very inconsistent run defender and tackler, and I know that that's not the primary responsibility of a cornerback, but when you hold him up against Surtain, he's definitely not there in that regard. And I thought from a ball skills perspective, he had a couple of good games this year, but for the most part, I thought there was a lot of meat left on the bone when it comes to ball production. So I do think there's a gap between Surtain and Horn, but really disappointed to hear this Farley information because I thought he was the best corner in the class.
Joe, of the pro days that we have seen so far, and again, big asterisk here because we always talk about how the pro days are much more minimal in terms of the equation compared to game film when guys give out final grades going into a draft. But having said that, how many, if any, guys have significantly disappointed you at their pro days?
It's a good question because it feels like everybody's doing well at these pro days. Without the combine, there's a lot less of a controlled environment to get consistent measurements across the board. And so it feels like every pro day that comes out, it's a guy turning heads and really showing well for themselves. So, you know, it's been kind of eye-opening to process this information and realize that the testing is just not normal compared to what we normally get with that even playing field at the NFL scouting combine. But you know, as far as disappointments, you know, I don't know there's anybody that extremely stands out. I think you can look at some guys like at Pittsburgh. A lot of the guys there are really disappointed, whether it was defensive tackle Jalen Twyman, who beefed up, and you could tell that he's really worked on his frame, but his athletic testing was very poor in terms of his 40 time, his explosive measurables, his agilities, and you know, if he's supposed to be a penetration style free technique, he did not show the athleticism to do that. And then the safety as well, Paris Ford, he really struggled in terms of showing explosive numbers in the vertical jump and the 40-yard dash. And if you're a safety and you don't have athleticism, that's going to be tough if you're going to be playing in space against these really talented, skilled players that the NFL offers. So I think a couple of those Pitt guys are the ones that stand out to me in terms of disappointment.
Joe, staying on the theme of pro days, Penn State just had its pro day. Micah Parsons certainly stole the headlines, but here's a player that opted out, and I would say that's why maybe the pro days are important for players we haven't seen on the field in over a year. Based on the cameras, it seemed as if the Giants had a presence there. What has been appealing about Micah Parsons, at least from his film, and did anything that happened at pro day steer you in a different direction based on what you saw?
Yeah, I think Parsons did a good job of confirming the player we watched on tape in 2019 in terms of the athleticism and movement skills. And what really stands out about Parsons is we're talking about like a high school defensive end that just made the switch to off-ball linebacker when he got to Penn State, and he saw a couple of years of really high-level stuff for a guy that hasn't played the position very long. He's got great size, obviously explosive, and he's one of those guys that just checks all the boxes in terms of physical traits. But what I really loved was his tape in terms of mental processing and playing downhill and understanding run fits and where to be and when to shoot a gap. You like to see a little bit more of a coverage profile, ability to kind of drop and play in space, and instead of taking that first step forward, being able to make it going backwards. But I think that will come with reps, and he's got the physical tools that you can't teach. And so if everything checks out with some of the character stuff that has come out with Parsons recently, I think he's the clear-cut top linebacker in the class.
Joe, you guys do a lot of mock drafts over there, and we're joined by Joe Marino from the Draft Network. How do you think, if at all, your opinion of how the first 10 picks in this draft are going to go, because that's obviously going to impact who the Giants can get at 11, has changed or shifted based not only on the pro days, but more importantly, what some of those teams ahead of the Giants have done in free agency with some of their moves? Who are the guys that you can say with some level of confidence that, this guy ain't going to be there when the Giants get to 11?
Well, it sounds like New York's committed to Daniel Jones, and so all Giants fans should be rooting for all the quarterbacks possible to go in front of them to push down talent down the board. But, when you think about Miami kind of being a wild card at number 3, when you think about Atlanta at 4, Cincinnati at 5, those are the wild cards because those are the teams that you think that could trade back. But I think if Giants fans, to kind of laser in on the question here, if Giants fans are thinking about Penei Sewell, the left tackle from Georgia, I'd probably cross that name off the list. And you think about what they've done with the wide receivers, bringing in Kenny Galladay and even John Ross to a much lesser extent. If you were thinking Jalen Waddle or Devonta Smith or Jamar Chase as that receiver, that answer to help out with Daniel Jones in what's a really critical year 3 for him, I think that the Giants have done a good job of attacking free agency to give them more flexibility with what they're going to do in the first round with that pick. So, the dream is probably Sewell. I think that would cross that off the board. But with the quarterbacks that we expect to go in front of New York's pick, with the receivers that are no longer a big-time need expected to go before New York's pick, I think this is setting up very, very nicely for the Giants to let the board fall to them. Maybe they're able to get, Azeez Ojulari, a pass rusher. Maybe they're able to get Micah Parsons if they feel like they can use that enforcer on the second level. But I think Dave Gettleman has done an underrated job here of addressing needs in the secondary, addressing needs of the skilled players, and setting himself up to maybe go best player available. When all this time I've been thinking offense. This defense was really good last year, but we need to make sure that Daniel Jones is surrounded. Dave Gettleman's done a nice job of checking some of those boxes and creating some flexibility for him in the draft.
Really quick follow-up, Joe, on that. I'm going to give you 4 players, rapid fire, rank them most likely to least likely to be there when the Giants select. Rashawn Slater, Patrick Surtain, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle.
Wow, that's
Can I
tough.
throw Pitts in there too, Joe?
Yeah, you can
too.
throw Pitts in. He's not going to be there, but I can have Joe disappoint you too, Paul. That's okay.
That's why I'm asking.
The pitch is least likely. Let's go ahead and start there.
Sorry, Paul,
I don't
told
think
you.
he's going to be available for you. I think Waddle's going to go, whether you look at Carolina or Detroit, Miami, too many destinations there. Surtain, now that Denver's found some cornerback help, I think there's a chance that he gets through. Dallas is probably going to snatch him up if he's there, though. That would be a tough one to think he gets through. I think the guy that could most likely be there is Devonta Smith, and I don't want to be a guy that crosses off his career because he's 170 pounds, but there's not a lot of guys with his stature that have had a lot of success in the NFL, and I think when it's all said and done, and general managers are having to make picks on players, they're probably going to overlook that 170-pound receiver. So I think he's the one that's most likely to be available.
How about Slater, Joe? You didn't mention him, Rashawn Slater.
I think there's a chance. There's a lot of buzz that some teams like him above Penei Sewell. I think in my most recent mock draft that I put out last week, I had the Giants picking Rashawn Slater, and so I think there's an outside chance. But I would put Devonta Smith ahead of him, and then I would get to Slater in terms of most likely to be available.
Joe, it seems to me that most people think that Micah Parsons is going to be the first defensive player taken, and certainly has a very good shot at being in the top 10. But I've got to ask you something here because I'm really wrestling with this. I understand all of the phenomenal numbers that he put up at Penn State's Pro Day, and that is simply off the charts. That's great. And we see his production at Penn State, but he was a guy who played between the tackles. I see him as a 4-3 middle linebacker in the NFL or as a 3-4 inside linebacker. The problem is he puts up these numbers at the pro day that indicate he's got the physical tools to play outside linebacker or an edge rusher in the pros. And the people who tell me that, he could be a top 5 pick are saying, well, he's going to be an edge rusher. Look at the tools. Look at the numbers he put up. The problem is that's not what he did at Penn State. And that's more of a projection for me than it is a sure thing. It's almost like asking Aaron Judge to bunt instead of swing away for the fences. I'd love to know where you stand on this.
Well, I would agree with you. That thought hasn't even entered my mind that Parsons would play edge, and be a rush linebacker in a 3-4 or really be a pursuit style player.
Thank you.
I'm with you. I think this is a guy that you play as your Mike linebacker in either a 3-4 or a 4-3, and that's fine. Like that, there's plenty of value for that in today's NFL. If you can play in space and contribute on every single down, then you have a home. And to me, linebacker is a position that I think is unfairly labeled as not a premier position, but in today's NFL, I think it is if you can play on every single down. And while Parsons isn't proven in coverage quite like you wish he was, obviously he has the athleticism to play in space. And one thing that he is a very, very good blitzer. And so that gives him value on passing downs. Maybe he doesn't have the route anticipation and comfort as a zone dropper quite yet, but that's okay. I can have him attack gaps and blitz and wreak havoc and really unleash that athleticism coming into the face of the quarterback. So I'm comfortable with him being the first defensive player off the board, but I'm not even thinking about playing this guy on the edge.
Joe, as I mentioned earlier, Parsons opted out. Another guy that initially opted out, then he decided to come back, played limited games, was Rondale Moore, the Purdue weapon, I guess maybe it's better to call him now, based on what he did at his pro day. Unbelievable speed. His vertical jump also considered maybe one of the all-time best marks if we actually had a scouting combine. The reason I'm bringing him up is, people get enamored by these pro day numbers, but they also bring up, similar to maybe Parsons' concerns about off-the-field issues, Moore's lack of height. Does the skill set that was showcased at Pro Day launch him up draft boards and change people's mind, or does he pretty much still remain in that land of the unknown to you?
He's a tough projection. I mean, you go back to 2018 and watch his tape at Purdue. This guy's unbelievable. I mean, one of the most dynamic football players I've ever seen with the ball in his hands. I mean, I would actually label him as asinine, what he's able to do in space and making guys miss and inviting contact and just being a wizard to get out of some of these situations. You wish you saw more of a vertical receiving profile from him, but, Purdue didn't ask him to do that. They asked him to run a lot of shallow stuff and create after the catch. But what's comforting is that really in 2019 and 2020, he was limited because of injuries. And if there's anything that the Pro Day did for me, is it showed me that he's at least healthy right now. And I don't know that we've been able to say that for a long time with Rondale Moore. And, I think that he is one of those guys that's a Ferrari, right? He's going to have all the right parts and tuned up correctly. But, man, when he's on the field, I think he has the ability to be a difference maker. But I do think his lack of size, lack of vertical receiving ability, and the injury stuff puts him, as you said, they're in no man's land a little bit. I can see him going as high as the 20th pick and as late as, into the 50s or 60s.
Joe, how do you sort out the top of this edge rusher class? You saw Jason Owe, which everyone expected, by the way, blow up his pro day. We all knew that was going to happen. He did it. But you look at his tape, and he's kind of a one-trick speed rusher pony. He had no sacks last year. You got Rousseau, who sat out, not really, he's got the size you want, but I'm not sure he had a lot of sacks from the inside at Miami 2 years ago. Go down the list. Azeez Ojulari, who you mentioned earlier. How do you break down the top of this edge class? Because Paul and I have made this point a lot that we think it's a very high-risk, high-reward type of class where I could see any of these guys come into the league and being great. I could see these guys come into the league and not being starters in 4 years.
Yeah, I'm with you on Owe and Rousseau. If you're wanting immediate production, I don't think it's going to happen from those guys. And so if you're willing to play the long game there and wait and believe that you can develop their gifts, sure. But I think they're both extremely raw, and they wouldn't be players that if my job was on the line, if I'd be picking them in the first round. What I do like, there's three players that I think are at the top of this edge class that I would use the first-round pick. Kwity Paye from Michigan. I think he gives you all – I mean, his pro days today, he's going to blow it up, and everyone will be raving about him. And I think from a tape perspective, I mean, he might be the most complete guy in terms of size, athleticism, run defense, and pass rush acumen. I mean, he's a rare dude, converted running back in high school, and he's really blossomed at defensive end. I love Azeez Ojulari from Georgia. He's got length, he's got burst, he has bend, and he's lean, right? He's like in the 240s, but watch the Alabama tape. This guy was standing up pullers and really just setting the edge very firmly. I think he plays much bigger than his size, and if you're looking for that guy that just has the ability to run circles around guys as a pass rusher, Ojulari is definitely in play. And then that third guy is Jalen Phillips from Miami, former big-time recruit at UCLA, medically retired at one point, so there's some risk there. But he went to Miami, and in 2020, we saw that five-star recruit. I think in terms of a size, athleticism package, ability to stand up, put his hand in the dirt, do everything that you're looking for, as long as he's healthy, he might be the best of the group, but I do think there's some buyer beware. But, look, if I'm taking a first-round pass rusher, it's Ojulari, it's Paye, it's Phillips, or it's nobody.
Would you pick one of those guys as high as 11?
I would pick for the Giants, and that's really where the conversation with the Giants has shifted for me, because I was offense, got to help Daniel Jones. Dave Gettleman has solved a lot of those issues in free agency. I think there's some need on the offensive line. There's nobody there at 11 that I would take. Maybe Rashawn Slater would be an option, but unless he's, if he's gone, then I'm not thinking about offensive line. That shifts the attention to defense, and Ojulari is a pass rusher that I would love for that scheme. And, I know he's just a redshirt sophomore, but you just got to watch the tape. Watch him play Alabama. Watch him play Auburn. This guy is advanced, and I think he's capable of making an immediate impact. And if I was picking an edge and I was the Giants at 11, I'd be targeting Azeez Ojulari from Georgia.
Joe, one other position that we don't talk about a lot with the Giants because Saquon Barkley is their starting running back, but he is coming off of serious knee surgery. And quite honestly, we're all crossing our fingers that he is Saquon Barkley when he gets back to the field this year. But let's assume for a second that the Giants wanted to hedge their bets and that maybe in the third or fourth round they wanted to pick a useful running back that could help shoulder the load if Barkley is not all the way back or if for whatever reason he has to start the season a little bit late. I kind of like a guy like Kenneth Gainwell. Do you see value in the third or fourth round that could give the Giants some immediate running back production should they need it?
Yeah, as soon as you started, building into this question, I was thinking Kenneth Gainwell, and then you dropped the name, and I would agree with you. Only 1 year production at Memphis, but my goodness, that 1 year was really, really dynamic. He's kind of built like a receiver, but this guy runs angry. He's got explosiveness. He's a very outstanding pass catcher. I mean, you could really ask him to run a full route tree. He's got good ball skills and hands, and I think he's got just a really natural feel for the game in terms of reading defenses and knowing where to cut and stringing moves together. And I think he's going to be a productive player that, in a complementary type role, I think it would be a really nice fit in terms of what he could bring to the Giants offense, or, taking some of the load off of Saquon, but also adding another layer, because I think his pass catching ability is a real big asset. You could put both of those guys on the field and really put a lot of stress on defenses by having both those guys on the field that they have to account for. So he's definitely high on the list. If I were to bring another name to the table, Oregon State has a good running back this year, Jamar Jefferson. Really good vision, and that's what I loved about his tape. He just sees it so well. His vision in the hole, setting up his next move is really, really good. I like the way he's built, kind of low to the ground, low center of gravity, good contact balance, physical. Just takes really smart tracks with the football. And I think you wish he caught the football a little bit more consistently, but he's a really nuanced runner that if I'm targeting one, round 3, round 4, he'd be high on my list.
Joe, speaking of the depth of the draft, you mentioned that maybe your thinking changed based on what the Giants have done in free agency for the 11th overall pick. I think even maybe more of a fascinating conversation is potential targets for the Giants with the 42nd overall pick, their second-round pick. Where do you think value-wise, based on the depth of a specific position, you think the Giants could target in round 2 where they're pretty much presenting a situation where they're getting the most bang for their buck?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interior offensive line. I think that you can find a starting day one interior offensive lineman in the second round, and whether that's Wyatt Davis from Ohio State, who I think, if you go back to 2019, I mean, he was exceptional. I don't think he was as good in 2020. Had some issues staying square to blocks, but I'm believing the player that I watched in 2019 is the truth, and I think he'd be a wonderful second-round pick. And then there's 2 offensive tackles, Jackson Carman from Clemson and Alex Leatherwood from Alabama, that I would very, very much feel comfortable drafting as guards and thinking that they can make that transition. Really powerful guys. You think about just that ability to open gaps and complement, there's some young offensive line talent that I really like on the Giants, and I think that either one of those guys could come in and continue that identity of having an edge up front and guys that want to get after people and help, ease the loss of Kevin Zeitler. So, I'm thinking Wyatt Davis, Jackson Carman, Alex Leatherwood, guys that I think can come in and give the Giants a starter and an upgrade on that interior offensive line from day one. I think that's where the value is going to be for New York.
All right, final question, Joe. Final real rapid fire. Give me 2 quick predictions. Giants first and second round picks. We'll hold you to it. If you get it wrong, we're going to send you a big punishment in the mail. What do you got?
All right, I'll say their first round pick is Azeez Ojulari from the from the Georgia Bulldogs. Second round, give me Wyatt Davis from Ohio State.
All right, 2 big programs, and the Giants have not been shy about picking players from Georgia, so that certainly makes sense. Joe, awesome to talk to you. Thanks so much. Before we say goodbye, tell the folks about the Draft Network, where they can find your work, how they can get your premium service, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. TheDraftNetwork.com is the spot. We've got our mock draft simulator. You can go in and you can be dead gentlemen. Make those picks. If you sign up for our premium, you can get offered trades. You can trade up and down the order. You can trade future picks. We've got full trade-by-trade scouting reports on over 400 prospects and tons of content over at thedraftnetwork.com. If you want to keep up with my work, at Joe Marino on Twitter.
Joe, good stuff, my friend. Enjoy the next month. We'll talk to you soon, all right, pal?
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Appreciate it, guys.